Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by Techstrong. My name is Cody J. Brown, and I will be moderating today's session. We have an exciting presentation ahead of us, but before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping notes. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the discussion, it will be made available to rewatch. You will receive an email after the webinar concludes with a link to access the on-demand. We want to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the program by using the Q&A tab. We will try to address as many as you can send in, so please get your questions in early. We also encourage discussion by using the chat tab. Let us know your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or just say a quick hello. And finally, at the end of today's webinar, we will have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Stick around to see if you are one of our 4 lucky winners today. But let's go ahead and kick off our webinar. Our topic today is helping people adopt DevSecOps in the federal government and the enterprise. And I'm joined by Alex Barbado, Public Sector Solutions Engineer at VMware, focusing on the Tanzu suite of products. Alex, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Cody. I appreciate it. And I also have a very important question now, if I'm eligible for those $25 gift cards, because if not, I feel a little bit left out, but I'll let it go. And hello, Alan. Hello, Cody. Love to see it. All right, so let's get started. First things first, I totally want to open the floor to everyone for questions and chat as we go through, and just to get our fingers ready and get used to the idea of chiming in whenever you have something. I'm going to start a very important poll that is very scientifically driven, and while people are answering, I had someone that I was working with recently in the cybersecurity realm that was of the belief that pineapple is truly great on pizza. I have a very differing opinion. I reluctantly put yes as an option on this poll, mostly out of just showing faith and respect for her position. But I think there's only really one right answer here. I accept A, B, or C, to be clear. So, all right. I see people chiming in. I'm really glad to see it. Feel free. You've now broken the glass barrier. You've interacted. Feel free to continue that pattern as we go through, and I will try to follow along the best I can to answer any questions that come up and get to things as we go. So I'll transition to my slides now. You should be seeing them on your screen. Feel free to yell at me if you don't, and we'll get through the talk here. So the talk today, I'm going to talk about helping people adopt DevSecOps practices in the federal government and ideally the enterprise. I am US based and I'm seeing people from around the world. I love to see it. These principles should be true no matter what organization you're trying to apply them to. So let's look a little bit at our agenda. From a high level, we're going to do the standard intro. I'll set the stage a little bit of what's a DevOps dream or a DevSecOps dream that we might see in some of these organizations that we work with. Let's come back from that dream and talk about now in the real world, what does this look like? How is this working? And I'll try and ground that in my experiences that I've seen working with a number of organizations over the past few years. We'll focus in on some problematic patterns and try to come back to more successful patterns that we've seen before we wrap up. Hopefully that sounds great. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them as always, and let's keep going. Let's start with who am I? My name's Alex. Like I said, was introduced, I am an am a public sector solutions engineer at VMware Tanzu Labs. I'm also an Air Force veteran, a U.S. Air Force veteran. I predominantly wear an application developer hat. I've also been known to dabble in cybersecurity outcomes just enough to be dangerous and hopefully deliver some good outcomes, but mostly danger. And now I am currently very focused on actually helping teams adopt these outcomes. So that's where I spend my day to day when I'm not pretending to be Ryder from Paw Patrol for these 2 little ladies that you see here. This is from a few days ago from Halloween and was way too cute not to share out to the world. So I might be experiencing a little bit of father bias here, but I'll let you confirm or deny. So here we go. Let's focus a little bit on the outcomes that we've delivered at VMware, hopefully to ground you in a little bit of evidence that, hey, this is backed by where I've come from, what I've experienced, and get us ready for where we're going to go from there. to date, over the past 4 or 5 years, we've done a number of engagements just in the federal space. So that's not looking at all of the number of other engagements across our private sector partners and all the various enterprises from Home Depot to CVS. I mean, you look on VMwareTownsview.com and you'll see that there are a number of case studies that we can look at, but I've primarily focused on our public sector and federal outcomes. And the things I really want to drive home is our emphasis on getting applications in production and doing that quickly. That's really what we are grounded in, no matter what vertical you look at within VMware Tanzu Labs. We always want to focus on getting apps in production. And I think that's a founding tenet of DevOps and really doing DevSecOps, DevOps, pick your framing, in having that strong desire to get things in production, get them in front of users, get feedback. Because absent that, what is really the point of trying to really expedite and focus in on DevOps or DevSecOps practices? All right. Let's get to our dream now. Let's imagine Susie. She's a part of a program office, which is a construct that we typically see in federal government engagements in the United States, where they have effectively like a mission. They're delivering some mission. In this case, we'll say Susie is building a ship navigation tool. It helps ships in the Navy navigate around wherever they're going. That's her charter. Well, as a part of Susie's mission, she's tasked with helping manage the various systems and tools and software, hardware, you call them what you will, that will run on these ships, which means she has to have a number of people involved to actually build and authorize those systems, from operators to security, testing and QA, other leaders that help manage those functions and organize them, as well as the various softwares, hardwares. You pick the tool, all of the bits and bobs that have to go into making that software run, which is not all that different than what we see in enterprises, right? Like as an enterprise and line of business, I may have to manage a similar amount of functions. You may see more centralized IT take pieces of this off of your plate, but by and large, this is a fairly standard model where you have to say, hey, you build it, you run it, that's how it goes. We see that in many different forms. Now, what typically happens is Susie's like, I've got a good idea. I've seen, I've read the Phoenix project, I've read the Unicorn project, and that model that we see of this long feedback loop through various hurdles and various people, I can make that faster. I see people out there doing this in a faster way, using modern practices, making smaller teams, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to do that here too. I can do this. Like, I just have to structure everyone in the right ways. And I know that I can get everyone to move faster through those funnels that we just saw in the previous slide. I can make that pipeline shorter. So what typically happens then is Susie says, I know what I'll do is I'll focus on automation. Automation then is a big buzzword that we hear, right? I'll take all of those functions that we see through ops, security, testing, and leadership, and all the various components of the systems that we're working with. I'll put them through some sort of DevOps, DevSecOps pipeline, and it will come out the other side ready to run on our ship or ready to run wherever it's going to run. The theory is great. It really is great. Susie's probably very excited. She says, I can put these pieces together. I can make it work. Now, in practice, that can be much more challenging. The unfortunate outcome that we typically see from stuff like this is a few years pass, and Susie will have grown quite a few gray hairs from the battles that she'll have fought. She'll hear quite a few no's. They'll vary in phrasing. And Susie will work really hard, but ultimately not achieve the results that she's looking to get. And that's the problem, right? That is the problem in achieving the dream, is how do I get through those hurdles of saying, hey, I have an idea. I know this can be better. The current process isn't delivering me the outcomes that I'd like to deliver, but how do I get to the other side of the hurdle? And not only that, how do I not implement processes that have a proven track record of not being successful, or take on challenges that I know I won't be able to overcome? Taking a pause, looking at the Q&A, see if we got any yet. Looks like we are doing okay. Hello to all the people from Toronto, LA. I love this global group. Cool. So what's going wrong here? Why is Susie not able to get apps and really outcomes to mission owners faster? What's getting in the way? Four key areas that I think I've seen organizations struggle in the wild through my engagements that I partnered with in a number of federal organizations and other organizations, frankly, as well, banks, you name it. These are 4 common patterns that I see that lead to lots of challenges. They aren't impossible, right? They aren't all necessarily like contraindicators of success, but I do see these 4 patterns really causing a lot of strife for organizations when implementing. 1, we see big bang. I'll talk more about what they are. We see people trying to make great processes and ultimately throwing the baby out with the bathwater, i.e. throwing out things that are working. A lack of building strategic partners. And last, focusing on tech choices and processes over outcomes. Let's look at the first one, big bang. As an example of what big bang might look like is Susie says, hey, I've got it. Over the course of the next 2 years, we're going to build the perfect path to prod, the perfect platform. We're going to build the perfect DevOps process to get to production. It's going to run on Kubernetes. It's going to use the latest and greatest from the CNCF landscape. It's going to have the VMware, you name it, running. It's going to have all the other, open source, closed source, vendors. It's perfect. Like, this is the perfect pipeline, and it will work in exactly these ways. I'll click a button, it'll compile my code, test it, scan it, deploy it to production, harden it, the whole kit and caboodle. It's going to be so amazing. And then at the end of the 2 years that come after that, while Susie's still trying to build that perfect process, she'll go to present it to their users and sarcastically, they'll be like, we don't use computers anymore. Like, you're not even building for the right time. And that is often the problem we see with big bang, particularly in large enterprises or the federal government, where these investments in big bang outcomes typically involve so many interdependent pieces of functionality and or teams, which really lead to long lead times that are trying to tie things together and make it difficult to actually deliver and put to use. The next problematic pattern that we often see is one that I like to call throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In this scenario, Susie will say, hey, I want to build this new magic automation. But that thing that Steve built last year that like kind of works, but doesn't work that well, it's not perfect. I don't want that anymore. Like, it's got to go. Like, it just doesn't deliver the outcomes that I want. Let's get that out of here. Let's focus on my big beautiful automation, because Steve's path just isn't going to get the outcomes. And it's never done, or typically not done, in any sort of malicious intent. It's not meant to be like a mine's better than yours. While surely, humans are humans. What we see here is, to put it more in like real terms, is we see tech that is maybe not the latest and greatest, maybe isn't perfect. We see before the new process has been validated or tested in any way, we'll see efforts wind down on the currently existing processes that are delivering outcomes. Now, I'm not saying if, hey, your current process pushes something to prod once every decade, that you don't potentially go, maybe we don't do that anymore, because hopefully, right, you're delivering outcomes faster than a decade in your new process. But you have to start like somewhere. And ideally, you don't throw out the existing world in favor of the new latest and greatest, because there's risk in that, right? And I see orgs really fail here in that they end up delivering nothing because they've closed all their doors, even the ones that were open and working. Next, and a really, really big one, is a lack of strategic partners. We often see that teams will start, for no ill intent of the Susies in the world or people on Susie's team, they'll come in and they'll say, I want to build something great. And they'll get to work. And they won't go out and actually do the legwork of figuring out who has a vested interest in what we're doing here and making sure that we're building something that aligns with all the various interests that we have internally. And it results in competition often, and or just disinterest or lack of support, which are all things that can lead to a budding effort failing because it doesn't have the support or the buy-in that it needs from the folks around the organization. This one's particularly challenging when you think about it's very easy to over-rotate here and try and get every... thanks, Paul. Excalibur. It's you didn't want me drawing these slides by myself, I promise. You would not have been able to read anything, so big plug for Excalibur. But this one is particularly challenging because, like I said, you can really over-rotate here, and you can spend all of your time trying to get buy-in and build nothing. Cool. And last of the problematic patterns that we sometimes see are focusing on tech choices and processes over outcomes. In this case, Susie will be, influenced in whatever way, and she'll say, I know what we need. We need this tech because I saw it on LinkedIn, or I heard from, this other org that we're working with, or my higher ups, that these are the latest, greatest tech, and we need to have these things. And then we got to build this very specific process that only could work in this most narrow of cases. And that's going to be our path to prod. It's going to be great. And you're like, wait. Why? Like, why do I have to do those things? And it's rarely done in any way that is beyond just being influenced by outsiders or influenced by the patterns that we know. But what this particular problem showcases is a lack of focus on user outcomes. And that doesn't have to mean just the end user, the person on the ship. That could be users for operators or the like. Say I work in an organization that's never even heard of a Kubernetes. It might not be in my best interest to try to force everyone to adopt Kubernetes. There's a bit of a give and a take there, and especially in large enterprises, those types of transitions can be monumentous. And just because something is new and shiny doesn't mean that it's the right choice for you or for your org. And it doesn't even mean that necessarily you should play in those spaces at all, right? Your team might not be well suited for those problems in any way, shape, or form. All right. We talked a lot about what hasn't worked. But let's talk about things that might work, right? As we're moving through our funnel, we've gone through the dream, how that becomes problematic ways of implementing those things. Now we'll talk about successful ways that we've seen this work. And ultimately, we'll get to the tactical advice. So we're getting there. We're almost halfway. So again, feel free to hop in with any questions. We're moving at lightning speed. Patterns that we've seen that have led to success include things like starting small, making sure to measure the things that actually matter to your organization, building good relationships and garnering goodwill, and focusing on the core competencies of an organization. Let's dive into each of these individually. Start small. What we see Susie do here is she really chops in that future future magic pipeline vision that she sold, and she chops it up. And she says, hey, if I just take this one little sliver of the app and I get my partners in the room and we say, hey, that's not going to be perfect, but what if we do this? What's the risk of this? What if we do just a little teeny bit and we iterate out from there? We see tremendous success adopting this pattern in large organizations. And I can't take credit for this, right? Like, this is lean startup. This is all the agile philosophy, right? It's so much easier said than done to start small. But the real key here is focusing on user outcomes to lead to a small slice. What's something that we can slice off that's small that will iterate us towards a better future, right? And the trick is, through each of those iterations, not actually making the same behemoth that you started with, right? It's easier to start small. The hard part is not finishing huge. But starting here is very key to having an actual successful outcome. And I mean, it's my number one go-to. In every engagement that I've worked on, I always say, hey, like, what's the smallest thing we could do here to start moving the boat, to start getting people excited? Because all of the other things that we'll talk about in these successful patterns, they build on that excitement. Measuring what matters. This one is particularly interesting when we consider, how do you actually know that you're moving things forward? We often see organizations struggle mightily, especially at the enterprise level, where we're saying, hey, like, how do I know to measure this new initiative so I can make sure that I'm incentivizing the right behaviors and also getting appropriate feedback so I can course correct if we're off? At VMware, one of the we have a tool that we often use internally called the 5 S's. And there's actually another process that involves 5 S's that is not exactly this one. So apologies that we've conflated words there. But our 5S revolve around speed, security, stability, scalability, and savings. We believe that one of those 5 things, or all 5 of those things, are at the core of any outcome that we're trying to drive. So when we enter engagements, we try to find which of these 5, or which ones of these 5 outcomes are you really focusing on, and what are ways that we can actually create systems that measure these outcomes to give relatively fast feedback to the people actually implementing the process. Creating this 5S process actually helps narrow the funnel quite a bit, so it doesn't feel as huge, right? Like, oh, I've got to measure, all the revenue for every app, right? Like, no, okay, hold on. So if we go at savings is what you want, or maybe it's, speed, because I want to be able to deliver outcomes to production faster. Great. So I can see that I'm pushing to apps to prod more frequently. That is a leading indicator that then we can look at the lagging indicator of saying, hey, are we actually creating more revenue now? We are seeing more pushes to production happening, but are we seeing, more uptime in our system? I don't know, wherever you might be measuring that, but we try to find within the org, what are the things that actually measure or matter to be measured. One of the popular frameworks that we try to encourage our orgs to take on in these early phases is around objectives and key results, which is a frame through which we can create these measures. An objective meaning, I want to have 1,000 users for my new applications, or actually that's a key result. Objective being, I want, my users to love our apps. I want them to be able to, I want them to be their go-to stop for, e-commerce or whatever. Well, cool. How do we measure that? What are some key results? I want 1,000 users. I want, I want 20 clicks per minute, whatever it may be. But those are the types of things that we try to rally around over just, did I deploy Kubernetes? Okay. Yes, you did. Now what? Where are we going with that, right? What's the outcome on the tail end of that? Sweet. Keep going. Next, we look at Gogue and Goodwill. For those of you that have read the Unicorn Project or the Phoenix Project, you really see this showcased in those books when they talk about the notion of the rebellion. And they create this effectively this self-forming team of folks that want to see things differently. They want to do things differently. So they work hard to create the space for themselves to do that. And that is so huge to any engagement being successful. At the large enterprise level, it is a fact that you will be dealing with politics. It is just unavoidable. The right answer may not always be the answer that will work due to incentives, complex organizational structures, and you just can't get around that. It doesn't help the cause to ignore those facts, but rather to say, okay, I know we have a complex environment that we're operating in. If I can get a diverse set of people excited about delivering this outcome, it becomes all the harder for it to fail, because there are a number of people from different organizations that will make sure to push to make it successful. This becomes even trickier when we look at orgs like the federal government that typically work with a series of contractors as well as permanent party personnel. And you have to take all of those people who may have completely different interests at their own core and get them to behave together towards a common outcome. And that's where, bless the people that I've worked with that take that challenge on and have the ability to still get those teams working together and rowing upstream. And to be honest, the most successful implementations that I've seen of this revolve around a common desire to deliver a mission outcome, right? Very rarely are you able to get teams excited about just, speeding up DORA metrics. It just doesn't make people all that excited. There is an audience that loves DORA metrics, and seeing, your mean time to recovery going down. Don't get me wrong. But when you're starting or when you're thinking about implementing these practices, it helps to have a mission and user outcome to help drive excitement for those other outcomes. Neither outcome is more important than the other by definition, right? It's okay to be excited that your servers are, more stable, or your products that have better uptime or are able to be, builds compile faster. Those are all very cool things. But it helps to have that tied to the end outcome of, well, okay, cool. Like, we're getting the app in production on ships more frequently, and teams they just come together out of nowhere. It just glues people together when they feel that common excitement and common rallying point. Doesn't have to be on any layer of the stack, but just have to create that sense of goodwill. Awesome. Focusing on core competencies. This one is particularly tricky and very easy to say, okay, VMware guy, I get it. Like, you work for VMware, you use VMware stuff. I get it. Like, I hear you. I don't want to belittle, like, I don't want to marginalize that. That's real. That's a real thing, right? But I do want to really point out that ideally, businesses are able to focus on the things that they do best. If what your business does best is building custom e-commerce software, then build custom e-commerce software. Ideally, there are vendors out there, especially at the enterprise and federal government level, that can meet the needs of the other things below the stack that you aren't as qualified or as eager to maintain for yourself. You don't get bonus points or deliver better outcomes because you took on more of the stack in this magic path to prod. To tie it back to Stacy here, what we typically encourage our customers to do, and again, you can swap out VMware for whatever makes you happy as a part of this conversation. It doesn't have to be a VMware Tanzu logo there. It could be, pick your provider of choice. But in our case, what we encourage PMO directors or people like Susie to do is say, hey, where in that line does your value offering stop? Are you building just standard apps that you need to run, in your data center because whatever the reason is, or you need to run it on XYZ cloud because that's where you're going? Cool. Well, your teams are familiar with, the VMware product. So maybe you stick with the VMware products and you adopt some of the new ones that help with managing things like Kubernetes or Path to Prod. There's a number of services and products in this space that can help you do that, right? And that's true for most vendors. They'll say that operate in this space. They offer ways to abstract away that. The trick that I think we hear on the opposite side of this coin is, well, what about lock-in? Like, I don't want to get locked in, right? Particularly in like my path to prod and delivery. Like, I don't want to be stuck using your thing for the rest of my life. And that's a very valid criticism. But there is a fine line between being locked into something and something delivering you value, right? Like, you do have to be able to see the differences there and say, hey, if it's delivering me value, am I really locked in, or am I just choosing to go with something that's helping me? And on the flip side, what if I was to find something that could do things better? Like, does that line, the subtraction line down the middle here between the Tanzu products in this case and your specific magic automation, does that line actually match with where my core competencies lie? If I'm not an expert at managing virtualization and managing container runtimes, like, probably anything above that line seems pretty well suited for my environment, right? Like, I'm not building anything custom for this particular set of products. I'm just building containers or VMs, whatever you might be building, and I'm running it. It's not necessarily tied in any, inextricable way to their environment. Great, great, right? You can move that line though. The line can move, and it's okay. I think that's one thing that orgs really have to reckon with, is where can I find that line that really maximizes my use of other like best practices and leveraging all the work that orgs have put into making like certain layers of the stack more manageable, so I can focus on the things that make my business unique and allow me to deliver the outcomes that I want. So we're near the end here. I did promise tactical guidance though of how you might be able to take these best practices or these experiences that I've had and how you might take them back to your org and implement them. So individual contributors, what might you look for and what might you do? We'll split this into two paths. One being your organization is motivated to change and has a specific need that's driving that change. And the other path being, my org is actually reluctant, but I want to see things get better and more efficient. Well, in the case that your org is motivated, all the things that we just talked about are pretty true. Find allies, build, start small and get incremental wins. That's the nice part of having wind in your sails, right? You don't have to fight anything, but you do need to start showing that the boat is moving forward. So in the case that you have organizational support, the biggest thing I can encourage individual contributors to do is get building, start adopting, start delivering outcomes that align to whatever that need is that your organization has. If it's, we can't keep our apps running for more than 5 minutes without them crashing, and that's causing us to lose revenue. Great. Show outcomes that drive your apps crashing less often, right? And that's a great win. And make sure that you look, is our revenue going up? Was it actually the app crash problem? Like, measure that. And you'll see tremendous yields from that, right? Now, what if the org is less excited about changes and you want to see something get better or more efficient? Well, this is where things get tricky, but the same principles do still apply. The tricky part here is you do have to do some research to figure out, well, what are my leadership incentives? Because the worst thing that you can do in this scenario is start actively fighting directives or desires from leadership, right? That is where it's almost impossible to succeed in a large organization when you're actively swimming upstream to the desires of those around you. It's probably time that you find something that suits you better if what you want is directly corollary to what directly like opposite what they want. Now, once you understand, like, hey, okay, I get it. Like, we don't have the same visions. They don't actually care that we're modernizing our infrastructure, but they do care that, we are able to build more widgets. Okay, I get it. So they need to deliver more widgets. What's a way that I can try to help, like, us speed up our widget building process? And maybe you get allies, right, in the same process, and then you can present ideas and iterate quickly, right? Make an idea, shoot it up, gets shot down. Make another idea, shoot it up, gets shot down. And if you're finding like nothing I'm saying is landing, it's like talking to a wall. They just do not want to do any modernization. They do not want to make things better. I can't figure out how to get them to move. Well, it goes back to build, right? Even when win's not in your sails, it does often help to just do the work, right? Rather than sit and theorize for too long. At some point, it helps to just say, I'm going to build something. I'm going to build it quickly, and I'm going to show that it works. And I'm going to try to make sure that I'm not going outside of my lane so far as to, ruffle everyone's feathers, but I'm going to show how I can incrementally improve my own processes and really deliver outcomes that way. Awesome. Last slide. Leadership. What should I look for and do if you're in leadership or you're in a position of some authority or power and you're able to make these changes? Again, we'll apply the same frames of an organization that is motivated to change and has a specific need to be met, and one that is reluctant, but you as a leader want to see it change. In the case that your organization is motivated to change, for a leader, it becomes particularly important that you find strong allies from outside of your organization to enlist in your dream. The idea of the rebellion totally fails if you don't have allies outside your org, because there's a lot of risk, particularly in the enterprise level, of other folks either building competing interests or just not liking your idea. So it's important that you have that buy-in from other leaders in your circle on what you're doing. And you say, cool, like, we're excited for this, right? And everyone's like, yeah, let's do this. Cool, awesome. And then, like we said earlier, build, align and measure teams early and often. This is where I think leaders can really shine, when they understand that their role is to help the team move forward. So create good mechanisms for teams to get rapid feedback on if they are successful or not. Now, what happens if your organization is reluctant to change, but you want to see things get better or more efficient? This is where you have to understand your org, and you have to understand what am I operating in? If I was to try to make a unilateral change like Susie to build a new process or deliver something in a small fashion, what are the things that would get in my way? Well, for one, I want us to do more virtualization. Our hardware team might not feel very welcome and might feel excluded if I move away from that. And I don't necessarily have the ability to make organizational changes, nor do I want to. What are ways that I can help them come along this journey, right? That's an example of an inherent barrier. Similarly, an inherent barrier could be, well, all of my teams operate in completely different places of the world, and we don't have a strong remote culture. So it'd be really difficult for them to collaborate in the ways that they need to deliver this new interconnected system. So I know I would need to tackle that to get them to be able to deliver. In whatever the case may be, no matter what those barriers are, in almost all cases, it's better to create a small but diverse team to pilot those efforts. Pilot can be an overloaded word, and I think we often use it in somewhat less than helpful ways in large enterprises, and that we say, oh, we'll pilot this. But that can often mean like, yeah, we'll test it out with little expectation that it will deliver, little accountability that we want to push it forward. We're just throwing something at the wall and seeing if it sticks. That's not my preferred way to do this, and nor is it the one that I think leads to the most success. A true pilot is measured and has expectations to deliver an outcome. So you measure against that and you create a team that you think can deliver against it. And lastly, as leaders, it can't be said enough that it is so important to measure and shout successes from the rooftops. Do it often, do it frequently. In enterprises and in large orgs, how you market and position yourself is so important to gaining support. People want to be excited. People want to feel like things are moving forward in a positive direction. Marketing, however, does sometimes feel unnatural and can sometimes feel a little bit gross. Like, well, the system's not perfect. I don't want to talk about it. Nothing is perfect. I promise you. If you go to any marketing, any ad, you pick it. They are all highlighting the great things about themselves and never highlighting the negatives. And that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be dishonest. There is a level at which point you're like, hey, like we built the perfect path to prod. It's going to be amazing. Everyone should come. And then it doesn't work at all. Yeah, that's not helpful. That's just outright facetious marketing. But if it's, hey, we've built an excellent place for static site apps in our site to, get out of using, 1,000 pieces of hardware to deploy or whatever, there are real ways that you can position yourself to highlight the successes and the outcomes. It'll motivate both you and your teams and those around them actually as well. So there it is. There's the talk. It's pretty quick, but we got through it. I think we can, cultural change is very important. I do want to open the floor to all the questions that we have. I can go back to any slides. We can talk through it. I want to make this as interactive as you all would like it to be. I know we have a few preloaded questions in here that I think would be good to talk through, but I'll give it a moment to see if y'all ask any questions or anything you want to talk through. While I'm waiting, let's go ahead and just answer some of these that are in here. So what about training? How do you bring new folks on board and up to speed with new processes and technology? This one's particularly challenging because you don't always have the levers to even create these training mechanisms. And I think this is where, particularly at VMware Tanzu Labs, where we espouse the idea of pairing. And that doesn't mean like you have to follow like extreme programming type pairing models, but ones where we encourage teams to collaborate often is really like a core of pairing that we take everywhere outside of just writing software. And you take that pairing model and you say, okay, cool. I don't know that I'm going to be able to do a 12-week process and make everyone, a new DevOps expert, but I do have the ability to leverage my internal leads, my senior developers, and help them to upskill the folks around them. So we often think of senior developers as like really good at what they do. And it's okay if that's all they are. But I think the most senior people are the people that are able to actually take their experience and share that with the folks around them and say, hey, cool. Like, I know that you are good at what you do, but let's actually take those skills and like share it around, spread the wealth. So there we go. Awesome. One down. Let's take a look at some more. We've got, what if you have a leader that is out and out against modern, oh, wait, hold on. I've got chat. Here we go. Umberto says, is it worth opening these transformations with leadership workshops to introduce them to Agile DevOps lean to get concurrence and support? I have a very spicy take here. I personally don't think so, if I'm being totally honest. I don't see a whole lot of value in trying to get your leaders excited around the concepts of Agile DevOps and lean, because really, like, they just don't care. They're like, that's just not what I'm here for. Like, there are people that you're going to need to get on board, right? Like, if it's your like manager of IT or something, they need to understand DevOps because you're about to change the entire way their org works, right? But if it's higher level leadership, they just don't care. They're like, I just want to know that our apps are more stable and that our, things are going up and to the right. And I think that's where the delivery key is, where I focus in, rather than like sitting them down and saying, here, I'm going to talk to you about Agile, DevOps, and Lean. You do kind of what we did here with Susie, right? And you're like, hey, we started out like this, and it took us 12 days to make an update to an application. After 4 weeks of us doing this on our own, we're now actually delivering this way, and we push to prod every 5 minutes, and we are seeing revenues increase by blah de blah, and we're seeing our developers are 95% more happy to be working here. And then all of a sudden your leaders are like, whoa, wait, what? Like, what? How did you do that? Go on, tell me more. I'm here. Like what else do you need? I want to break down all the walls. Like, why aren't we doing this everywhere? I think that just lands better than more of a theoretical workshop. Does that help, Umberto, or seem at least maybe not too controversial? While folks are maybe responding, let's look at the other one that I started earlier. What if you have a leader that is out and out against modernization? This one's tricky. This one's really tricky. And I think like where I've seen this be really hard is in my industry, that you'll get like what effectively are political leaders. They'll be in positions of like high level leadership, and they'll have their, I totally agree with what you said there, Umberto. You definitely have to give them a place to start. And if that's what works for your org, like by all means, like don't take my opinionation to mean that it is the right answer. Mold it to your use case. But yeah, in our orgs, we'll often see leaders that will have very strong opinions, and sometimes they'll even be grounded just like in a particular technology set, which can be really difficult when you are in an organization that is set up to deliver one way, and they're effectively asking you to completely change your behaviors to support some other model, and it gets to be really challenging. So what I encourage folks to do in those cases is, sometimes you have to be a bit contrarian. You do have to create your own rebellion to deliver outcomes. Because I know I just kind of answered the question that was just asked in this way, but it's really difficult for leaders to turn against delivered outcomes. It is not difficult in theory for them to say, hey, I just don't really like this process, or I haven't had good experiences with that buzzword in the past, so I'm out. But it is really hard for them to say, oh, wait, you're actually like, you're doing it, you're delivering an outcome. Okay, I get it. Like, I know I want this other thing, but it's hard for me to shut you down. It may happen. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, nothing is foolproof, but cool. Again, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll happily chat through them. Another question from Cody. Have you seen any examples of this being done well that you can maybe contextualize for us? Super interesting question. I'll split it into two, and ones that I've seen done well in both the public sector, in my case, and also in the private sector. We have a published blog post with the Space Force, the U.S. Space Force, talking about how they've implemented some of these DevOps processes. And I've been really impressed by how they started with a particular technology set, in this case, the Tanzu application service, and we're delivering outcomes there. And then also said, hey, cool, we need to move to Kubernetes, Tanzu Kubernetes grid. Let's switch to that. And delivering outcomes on both of those simultaneously, and never over rotating on, we want to make organizational change to the detriment of the outcomes that they felt they needed to deliver, of those 5 S's that we talked about for their users. So there's a really good example there from the public sector of how they've implemented. You can look up the blog and kind of follow through some of the like high level examples of what they've done and some of the tooling that they've implemented. From the commercial sector, I think one of the cooler examples that I was actually talking about this morning is at the Home Depot, just kind of how they've really modernized their e-commerce platform. A lot of that has been driven by the work that that they've done in partnership with VMware and VMware Tanzu. And I mean, it's pretty transformative. I mostly just get excited because it's really cool, like to think about like, oh, an item, you can find an item on shelf 12 and I'll have it ready in a box for you in 30 minutes. But they've done a lot of work there to help build systems that will like scale with like the size of Home Depot. So I'll dive more into those if people are interested, but I'll leave it there. David asks, any ideas of how to agilely move people around in a government organization to fulfill agile DevSecOps roles? This one is made particularly challenging. One of my good friends, Hannah, she works with the Army Software Factory, and it's something that she's talked about many times in a number of conferences that she spoke about, that particularly U.S. government, the way the roles are structured. I mean, we don't even really have roles for this type of technology set that we're talking about, of delivering DevOps outcomes and even like DevOps leadership. So it becomes particularly tricky of how do you move people around and how do you actually help them grow and deliver outcomes. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't think I have the magic answer here beyond saying, ideally, you can create structures for people to both be successful in what they need along the career ladder, knowing that, hey, all of OPM, Office of People Management, I think it stands for, isn't going to change. They're not going to fundamentally change tomorrow how they promote people and make decisions around hiring, while also understanding that people have real goals about where they're working. And I think this is where strong leadership comes in, of understanding like, okay, I know we've got to check these boxes for you to get where you want to go, but I know you have a passion to deliver here. And how can I align those various outcomes to lead to results? It's certainly not the most efficient model by any stretch of the imagination, but the best leaders I've seen really create a space for folks to not be pigeonholed to what they're supposed to be doing on paper, particularly in a world where like some contracts are written in a way that say like, you must build X in Y way and have these 7 people, right? Those types of contracts, I mean, oh my goodness, are so difficult to operate within, because what happens if, position 7 just isn't exactly written to the letter the way that I need it to? The more we can move away from models like that and focus on outcomes, the better, in my opinion. Umberto asks, a major impediment is the ATO process designed for waterfall. How do you get the authorizing bodies to adopt continuous ATO? I literally gave a talk on this morning, so I love this question. And what we encourage folks to do is, let me see if I can go back and find a good example. If we look at, let's take this slide. If we look at this slide and we say, hey, I want to help my cybersecurity orgs adopt, do authorizations in a more modern way, and I want to help them deliver outcomes. What we typically encourage is coming in with a strong sense of inheritance for those teams to really build on top of, because they understand inheritance. In practice, it can be difficult to implement with the sheer complexities of these systems at times. So we try and draw concrete lines for them to say, hey, okay, cool. What are the controls that are implemented over here, right? We try to help through these processes, because I would say the larger barrier to these flows actually isn't this process that we're writing here of saying, hey, what are the controls and how do you do these? How do I even write these in whatever system you're using, EMAS, whatever the system is that you're using to track these controls? The harder problem for these teams is actually just sheer uncertainty and the unknown. Right? When we talk about delivering in a continuous ATO way, this whole space of magic automation and delivering apps to prod with limited checks and fast feedback, those are very difficult for these teams to understand, to no fault of their own. It's just new. It's new to them. It's hard for them to understand, and that historically there are processes to the way that you do things. So what we typically encourage, on top of just doing strong inheritance models, is once you've gotten to this strong layer of okay, cool, I know that my infrastructure takes care of this. I know that my platform, Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, pick whatever your platform is, it solves these other problems for my controls. So when I get to my app, I have 50 controls and from a STIG, right, that aren't actually inherited from the platform or implemented, right, which is a dream in and of itself, that as an application developer I can focus on 50 controls. From there, we typically encourage organizations to get in writing from both their authorizing leadership and their business leadership a process approved, which we often call a playbook, to deliver outcomes rapidly to prod. So that playbook typically lays out guardrails, right? We try not to make them 500-page documents, but we try, like, ideally they are practical guidance of, hey, you follow these steps, you can iterate quickly in production. This is what we need from you. We need you to be able to verify that this is what's happening. And other than that, keep going it. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, your cybersecurity professionals are excited. The trick is getting them in the room and making sure they're involved, because, and that's not saying that they don't want to come. When I say the trick there is that, like, it's not a natural behavior, I think, for a lot of these orgs to have cybersecurity and, product development all in a room together saying, we're going to do this together and we're going to deliver outcomes together. And it's going to be uncomfortable for us both, but we're going to help get there. So hopefully that helps. Awesome. I think I have exhausted all the questions that I see. I'll wait another minute or so, see if anyone has any questions, and then I'll kick it back to Mr. Cody. Let's focus, switch out of this view. I do want to say, feel free to reach out to me with any questions, any feedback. I always love to hear what people are thinking. If you're like, hey, I think you're totally crazy, that can't possibly be true, I would love to know why. I'd love to learn from you and your experiences. So feel free to reach out to me in whatever form feels right. You can find me on LinkedIn, wherever you'd like. So again, thanks so much to everyone that came out. I really appreciate you all being here and taking the time to listen to me, and for participating. So grateful for that as well. So with that, Mr. Cody, I pass it back to you.
And thank you so much for today's presentation, Alex. I can tell a lot of work went into it, especially with all of the drawings and the artwork included on the slides. So that definitely helped to bring it home. Just a quick reminder to our audience. Sure. A quick reminder to our audience today that our session was recorded. So following this webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find the recording living on the DevOps website. So just visit devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It will be waiting for you. Now on to our 4 winners for our $25 gift card drawing. Our first winner is Christopher M. Congratulations, Christopher. Our second winner is Michael B. Congratulations, Michael. Our third winner is Umberto P. Congratulations, Umberto. And our fourth winner is Jan M. Congratulations, Jan, and the other 3 $25 Amazon gift card winners today. Please keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. And if you don't receive an email, just make sure you check your spam folder. Alex, again, thank you so much for being with us today. The presentation was wonderful and captivating, and I can tell that the audience was intrigued throughout. Do you have any final remarks just before we close out?
No, but I accept Cash App, Venmo, if anybody wants to send the $25. No. Thank you so much again, everyone. I hope you enjoy your gift cards. I hope you enjoyed the talk. And again, any feedback you have, please feel free to reach out. It was a pleasure.
Wonderful. And my final note, I would like to thank you, our audience, for being with us for the entirety of today's presentation. This is Cody J. Brown signing off. Have a great day, everybody.